In accordance with Standing Order 38, a motion to adjourn the House is deemed to have been made and seconded at this time. Therefore, the question is that this House do now adjourn. The honourable member for Brantford-Brant.
Mr. Speaker, Global News recently reported that prices for food products will go up 5 to 7% in 2022. This means a family of four will be spending $1,000 more a year, not on restaurant meals, but solely on groceries. This is in addition to the current rate of food inflation, which reached almost 4% this past October. When I asked the Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister about skyrocketing food prices in November, she said that I was too partisan and that Canadians should be proud of this government's economic accomplishments and Canada's AAA credit rating. I posted a video of my question along with her responses on my social media pages and asked my constituents what they think about the answer she provided. Here is one of the comments I received. Rick wrote, quote, "What does our country's credit rating have to do with inflation and higher costs to make a living?" End of quote. Mr. Speaker, I must say that I agree with Rick. When the government is trying to convince people that their lives became better, there is something wrong with that analogy. No rating agencies in the world can make life more affordable and secure the future for Canadians, but the government can and must do. Rick also asked me to keep fighting for accountability of this government. That's exactly what we, as the Conservative official opposition, do on a daily basis in this House. Another one of my constituents, Kathy, said, quote, "The Finance Minister and the Prime Minister are so out of touch with regular Canadians. She was disrespectful with her posturing comment," end of quote. What is undeniably disrespectful is to suggest that Canadians should be proud of the fact that they'll be spending $1,000 more on food in 2022. When I discovered that the government in its throne speech refers to inflation only once and ties it to childcare and the housing, I realized how deep the problem is. If these are the only two things that the government is planning to implement, hoping to decrease inflation, we are all in trouble. Often the Prime Minister likes to claim that they are going to spend even more on the programs that we already know don't work. These are exactly the talking points that the Prime Minister and his cabinet use every time we press them to update Canadians on what's being done to fight inflation. Their answer? To spend more. Let me make a comparison to that theory. If you can't even afford to own a vehicle and you don't change oil regularly, and if it snows and you don't change your tires, or if you're simply out of gas, it makes no difference how much you spend on auto detailing to make the vehicle look good. It won't get you too far. Angela from my riding commented, "That's the response that I received from the Deputy Prime Minister was not a suitable one. We haven't heard a satisfactory answer. This government is taking Canadians on a path of poverty for so many." Mr. Speaker, it's sad, but it's true. Poverty in Canada is real. This November, CBC reported that food banks are recording the highest number of visits ever. Food bank representatives called the number of visits devastating and horrific. What's worse, they said, is that the upward trend is expecting to continue. Just inflation is hurting my constituents. It's hurting all Canadians. Recent polls show that 80% say the cost of living crisis is making their lives less affordable. 60% of families with kids under 18 are concerned they might not have enough money to feed their family. What can be worse during the holiday season? Mr. Speaker, today I want to ask the Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister, without those repetitive talking points that I mentioned above, please explain to Rick, Kathy, Angela, and other Canadians how more of the same would lead us to anything different. Thank you.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Tourism and Associate Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much, and I'd like to also thank the member for Brantford-Brant, congratulate him on his election, and welcome him to the House of Commons. And I welcome this discussion. To be quite frank, Mr. Speaker, I feel that the issue that the member is raising is one of the most important issues facing this country and our government, and I would like to assure him that it is absolutely top of mind in the work that we are doing. In fact, the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance just earlier today held a press conference alongside the Governor of the Bank of Canada, Tiff Macklem, and They announced today that we will be renewing the bank's mandate to ensure price stability for Canadians, to ensure stability in the market generally. And the renewal of this mandate for the Bank of Canada means that the bank will be targeting a 2% inflation rate at the midpoint of the 1 to 3% inflation range, showing continuity and ensuring stability. The inflationary pressures that Canadians are feeling is a global phenomenon. We have said it many times in this chamber, and I'll say it again. Canada is actually faring much better than most other countries, most of our counterparts, I would add. Elsewhere in the OECD, inflation is considerably higher, including just to our neighbors down south. At 6.8%, the United States inflation rate is at today. The latest numbers in Canada are 4.7%. That being said, there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that inflation and affordability is a pressing challenge for Canadians. I myself felt it at the grocery store this weekend. I know that the constituents of my colleague opposite are feeling it, and so are my constituents. And I think that we need to look at the root cause of this increasing inflation, and all of the experts are pointing to the global supply chain interruptions, to the global rise in energy prices, and to the comeback of the global economy following the COVID-19 shutdown. Yes, there are certainly other structural costs that Canadian families are feeling, and that is housing and childcare affordability. I find it unfortunate that the member opposite is talking down the importance of affordable childcare and the importance of attacking the housing crisis here in Canada, but those are two very important factors that we are taking into consideration and that we are planning on implementing policies in order to tackle. For example, Canadians know that the $10 a day childcare program will reduce their overall cost of living. I believe that all provinces have now signed on, save for Ontario. I certainly encourage everybody watching and hearing this debate to lobby the Ontario government in order to get that done as quickly as possible, because it will make life more affordable for families. And in addition, of course, to housing, I know, Mr. Speaker, that I have very limited time. I would like to point out that the member opposite himself raised the issue of food banks. And I find it surprising, given that so much of the time that our government has spent over the pandemic in order to support Canadians, in order to implement programs, went in order to support workers through the CERB, went in order to support food banks and community organizations that were supporting our communities, and of course went to our small businesses in the form of wage and rent subsidies, without which our small businesses would have shut down. And so I would like to understand from the member opposite what he means when he says that we should not be investing in these programs going forward. We know the pandemic is still with us. We know that there are hard-hit sectors, and we know that we need to continue to have Canadians' backs. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Brantford-Brant.
Mr. Speaker, Canada is facing devastating problems caused by the pandemic. Canadians are struggling to make ends meet. My friend says I don't pay much attention to daycare costs and things of that nature. That furthest cannot be the truth. What I found was rather shocking is that the Minister of Families, Children and Social Development today indicated to this House that the idea of a $10 a day daycare plan is 5 years down the road. How is that going to help my constituents and other Canadians fighting to put groceries on their table and to deal with the rising costs of just about everything? Charles, a senior in my riding in Brantford-Brant, contacted me about the enormous struggles his adult children are experiencing. His daughter, a single parent of a newborn, is unable to afford the rent, let alone buy a home, and care for her child without the financial support of her elderly parents. It seems that this government thinks it's acceptable to saddle parents with the added burden of providing for their adult children and grandchildren because they cannot survive independently given the rising costs of just about everything. Why is this government hiding behind the talking points and not willing to share what is planned to fight just inflation in Canada?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Et, je pense...
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is clear that I've already answered that question, but for the sake of continuing debate, I would like to read some important facts. In Canada, we have recovered 106% of jobs as compared to before the pandemic. Our economic growth was 5.4% during the last trimester, which makes us one of the strongest G7 countries. I, of course, understand my colleagues' concerns about inflation. However, our economy is doing well. We made an announcement with the Bank of Canada today. We will continue to work to ensure that our economy continues to grow.